Revising Death. This is an encore video to the revision series on the topic of revising death, which is kind of perfect considering it's an encore, because death is not the end of life as we may assume it to be. And that is what I want to talk about today, because death is perhaps the most misunderstood concept of life. And so I want this video to help to shed some light on the concept and experience of death, both from your perspective and the perspective of the person who may be going through what we know to be the process of death, and to revise this concept so that you can see it more clearly and then have a very different experience of it, both for yourself and for the other. And I want to share how I revised my dad's passing in 2009. Just, a few years ago, I would have, maybe, I don't know when I did this, but anyway, I did revise my father's death. It wasn't an easy process. So I want to share with you what it was that I did that kind of really turned things around and made it easier for me to revise my father's death, and the impact that that had on me. So that's what we're doing today. My name is Hedley, and I am a law of assumption coach specializing in, law of assumption. If you'd like to know more about me or my offerings, including one-to-one coaching, my courses, my books, I Am Money, you will find all of those details in the box below this video or at my website, youaretheone.com.au. And if you are enjoying my channel, you're enjoying my videos and you're finding them useful, then I would like to invite you to press that subscribe button. So yeah, that would be great. All right, revising death as an encore to the revision series, which is kind of a perfect title for revising death, because death is not the end of life despite how we may experience it or what we believe it to be. And that's what I want to get into in this video. Before I do, some of you know this, perhaps those of you who are new may not know this, but prior to starting this channel, I was actually working in the end of life space. So I had done my death walker training, I had done my end of life like my doula training, and I was working in aged care as I was in the process of setting up my business, which I had set up and I was working in, which was helping people to prepare for the end of life, to make sure that they had everything organized and that they were ready and all their paperwork was done. And I had a few clients and I was in the process of building it, but then I started this channel at the same time. And this just all took off super easily and organically. And I was like, oh, wow, I'm really loving this. And this is coming so much more easily. Perhaps this is where I really do want to be spending and investing my energy and attention. So I kind of let all of that go. And I quit the aged care center and I kind of let the business, which hadn't really taken off yet, I kind of let that just dissolve into nothingness. And here I am. But prior to this, I thought I was going to be an end-of-life coach. That's where I was kind of heading. So I'm very happy to not have gone down that track, because I believe that there are people who are much better suited to that, and I'm very much suited to this. So I'm happy the way things worked out, but I certainly have always had that affinity with that end-of-life space and that process of what we know to be death. And I wanted to go into that now, and then also share how I did revise my father's death, the impact that that had on me today. And what that's going to do is just to help you see things a little bit differently, because revising death, if we look at just that term in itself, revising death is to see again. So to revise is to see again, and death means to see death again. And what that actually means is to see death correctly. And what that means is to see life correctly, because life and death are two sides of the same coin. You cannot have one without the other, but one is only there so that we can have the experience that we are having, that we know to be life. So death is the contrasting state of life that allows life to be experienced. That is the purpose of death. Death has been a very misunderstood concept, and that has created a, let's say, less than favorable relationship with it. It's very misunderstood, especially in the Western world. And I would also attribute that to the fact that the language doesn't do it justice. Because language, while it's not the answer, is the signpost for awareness, and the words, the phrasing, end of life and death are incorrect. And I was just using it in my introduction because that's the language that we all know and that we relate to. However, that language does not describe what the experience is. The end of life is just plain incorrect. There is no end of life. Death is also not correct because, again, there is no end of life. So what we experience of death, which is the end of life, is incorrect. The closest language I can find to explain this process that we're going to be talking about, which we know as death or end of life, is end of body. That's the closest I can get to it, is the end of the physical body, the end of the sensory awareness of the body. Even then, it's not 100% correct, but it's the closest phrase that I can get to, and maybe there's something else that I'm not aware of. If you know, then please do put it in the comments. But it really is the end of body or the end of sensory awareness. In order to understand how to revise death, we have to understand what death is. So let's go back to the foundational principle of this work, which is consciousness is the one and only reality. Reality is the reflection of consciousness. Okay, so that's the foundational principle of law of assumption. Now, for most of us, for all of us, we see reality as life. So let's then take that word life and let's put it into that principle. So consciousness is the one and only life, and life is the reflection of consciousness. So where does death exist? Because death is a very real experience that we have all experienced and will continue to experience as long as we are in this physical container we call a body. We are going to experience death. So then where does death exist? Well, in order for life to know itself and to have the experience of itself, it has to have a contrasting state. It has to create a contrasting state which comes from itself in order to have the experience of itself. But in order to have the experience of itself, it had to create dimension. That's the third dimension. So death, that we know it as, can only be experienced at the level of third dimension, at the level of reality, at the level of what we see as life. So they're both life. Consciousness and reality are both life. One is infinite and eternal. One is finite and time-bound, meaning it's based in time and space. Now, the only way we can have the experience of that life in reality is through contrast. Now, the contrasting state of life is death. The only way we can have this experience is through death. So when we come into this container of this physical body, we are actually coming into the container of death, which is why Neville calls this world of reality the world of death, is the reality of death, the world of shadows. Because as you come into this physicality of life, the only way you can have the experience of this is with the contrasting state of death. Here's where it gets interesting. Death can only be experienced by the observer. You may need to replay this now because your brain may just go, Death can only be experienced by the observer. What I mean by that is, I'm going to take my dad, for example. So my dad died in 2009. I was experiencing my dad as dying, and I was seeing him as dying. And then when he died, I experienced his death. So I saw the end of my dad. I saw the end of my dad's life. Now I'm the observer of my reality, and I'm experiencing the death of my dad. My dad is not having the same experience. He is not experiencing the death of himself. I'm experiencing the death of my dad. My dad is having a very different experience. So my dad was having the experience of releasing the body and returning into consciousness, infinite eternal life. So he was having the release of the body. That is a very different experience from the experience that I was having. And I'll give you an example of this. Just before my father died, we had an opportunity to have our last conversation with him. So I went up and I was thinking, oh my God, this is going to be my last conversation with my dad. Oh my God, like it was so big and, huge. But I remember in that conversation, I was like, Dad, I love you. Thank you for being my dad. And, and I'm having this experience of this being the last conversation with my dad. And my dad was clearly not having it. he was having a very different experience. He was not having the experience that I was having. And it was the first moment where I had this realization that what I was experiencing was not what he was experiencing. He was experiencing something very different. He was in the process of releasing the body. His body is starting to shut down. He's no longer eating and drinking, and he's sleeping a lot more. So this is the process of death, which is a releasing of the body. While we are losing the sensory awareness of them, they are not losing the awareness of them. They are experiencing the release of this thing that we see as life, but is actually a reflection of death. The minute you are born is the minute you begin to die. I know that sounds confronting, but that's the truth of this reality. The only way you can have this experience of life is through the contrasting state of death. But death is not the end of life. It's simply the release of the limited, constricted container that we have all been squished into in order to have this sensory experience. And what revising death is revising the way we are seeing what we are perceiving as the end. Death can only be experienced from the observer. Death is not what the observed is experiencing. They are experiencing a return to infinite, eternal life. And that is where the observer gets to shift. You get to shift your awareness from what you are observing to what they are experiencing. And by shifting your awareness from death to life, you're going to have a very different experience of death. Now, with the experience of death is the loss of the sensory awareness of that person. So when my father died, while he may have returned to infinite, eternal life, I'm still left here. And I'm experiencing the loss of my sensory awareness of my father, meaning I can't see him in his physical body. I can't hear his voice in physicality. I can't smell him. I can't, I'm not tasting him, but I'm not engaged in that sensory experience of my father. Now, because there is a loss of that sensory experience of my father, that is a loss that I'm going to experience on the physical level of my being, and that's what we experience as grief. So that is a very real experience that we are all going to have, because with that loss of sensory awareness, there is a grieving process of that loss. But that does not equate to the loss of awareness of my father. Even though I've lost the sensory awareness of my dad, I haven't lost the awareness of my dad. And it's the same for my dad. Even though he's released the body, he hasn't lost the awareness of himself. So if you're focused on death, then you're going to have the experience of loss. And as the observer, you have the free will as to which one you tune into. You can focus on reality and the loss of sensory awareness, or you can focus on consciousness and the awareness of this person in consciousness. And you can also bring your sensory awareness to them in consciousness. And of course, when my father passed over, I then had dreams that were very real. I also spoke to him before he did leave, and I said, send me a sign that you're still with me after you've left your body. And then he came to me in a butterfly. And of course, I'm looking at the butterfly going, Dad? And I'm thinking, well, I'm going to need a little bit more than just a butterfly. So I said to the butterfly, I'm like, if you are my dad, you're going to have to make it a little bit more obvious. So the butterfly came and landed on my knee and just sat on my knee. I've never had a butterfly just land on me. So I was like, Dad? Oh my God, Dad. And then of course the butterfly flew away. So now when I think of my dad, I will always see butterflies. And if I want to see my dad in reality, I'll say, hey, Dad, come and give me a sign. And sure enough, a butterfly will come and say hi. So now the experience of my dad has expanded into another more expanded version of life that is beyond the body. Keep in mind with this work, and this is a really important point, we have no control over reality. So if you are focused on death at the level of reality and you're focused on revising death in order to get that person back into form in your reality, you are going to find yourself bumping up against a brick wall because you're focused on reality and we don't have any control over reality. So while I'm not discounting that possibility, first of all, I can only speak from my own experience, and I have not experienced the manifested form of somebody who has passed over, returned to my reality, which is not to say that's not possible. It's just I can't speak to it because I haven't done it, and I also haven't had any interest in doing it, because that to me is a limited form of life. I'm much more interested in consciousness and then how that gets reflected back through my reality in ways I know not of. Death can only be experienced by the observer. The one you are observing who is dying is not dying. That's your experience. You're the observer of that. And you're seeing that as death because you're experiencing the loss of the sensory awareness of that person at the physical level. Keep in mind, death has to exist in order for you to have life. You can't have life at the level of reality without the experience of death. You just can't have it because you require contrast. You require dimension. So the person you are observing as dying is going through a very different process to what you are experiencing because they can never lose the awareness of themselves. They are simply releasing the limited body that has kept them constrained and constricted, and they are returning to that infinite eternal consciousness, that infinite eternal awareness where suddenly all of those limitations is gone because they're no longer in the land of contrast. They're no longer in third dimension. So all of those contrasting states just dissolve. Now, what happens after that? Well, we'll know when we all go through it, which we will, but it is not the end. It is not the end. So that brings me to the revising of my father's death. I know that revising death is to see it more clearly. So Dad's cancer was an incorrect observation of consciousness. So if there's sickness, there is an incorrectness of consciousness, meaning I'm holding an incorrect story within my consciousness of my dad. So I'm seeing my dad as sick. So for me to revise his death meant I had to see him as well. Now that was challenging because my reality had so much evidence of him being sick. And every time I would go back and try to revise these situations, it wasn't really working. Now, it wasn't until I did what I shared in the last video, revising for others. And when I revised my dad's abuse, I came back to revising the cancer, and I came back to the scene in the hospital where the doctor said, sorry, there's nothing more we could do. And I went back to that scene, and suddenly that was the scene I was struggling to revise. And after having revised my dad's abuse, I went back to that scene in the hospital. And finally, I could imagine the doctor say, the surgery was successful. We don't have any evidence of the cancer. You're well enough to go home and you're going to continue on living a natural and normal life. So by revising the thing that caused my dad's cancer, which was the abuse, which of course I didn't know until I was aware of it, I was then able to heal the cancer. Now, because I was able to revise that diagnosis so that my dad was well and he could go home and he could live a great life, from then on, the narrative of my dad's life just took on a life of its own. It was almost as though I sat back in my own imagination and I saw my dad. Suddenly he'd met this woman. He was completely committed to her. They ended up getting married. And there was this beautiful scene where he's on a yacht and he's in the Mediterranean and he has got a wedding finger on. And I get on the boat and we have lunch, and I'm obviously there for a holiday and I stay on the boat. And I can feel myself on the deck. You know how those boats have that kind of wooden floor? And I feel myself moving up the steps and I can see everything very, very clearly. My dad is well, my dad is happy, my dad is in love, my dad is living his best life. Now, this is all in my imagination, but it's true there, it's real. And what that does, being able to see my dad as healthy, as well as living his best life in love and, sailing the Med with his beautiful wife, that brings me into a state of peace. That's all it does. It just makes me feel better because I can go in and go, yeah, Dad's living his best life. That's awesome. I can also talk to my dad. My dad is alive and well in my imagination. So you may hear this and go, oh, but that's just in your imagination, which means you are still valuing your reality over your imagination. For me, in my life, my imagination is real. It is true. It comes first. My reality comes second. I'm less concerned with what's going on in my reality because I know who I am. I am is the infinite I amness, and I am is consciousness, meaning my consciousness is first, always and forever. Consciousness is the one and only reality. So my consciousness, my imagination is the one and only reality. So if I'm having an experience in my consciousness that my dad is living his best life, that's true. It's real. It's happening. It's there. Now in my reality, I experience the results of that through my physical body because my body is in reality. My body is the reflection of consciousness, and I'm experiencing the health and happiness and joy of seeing my dad alive and well. And so that is revising death. Revising death is seeing death correctly, first of all, and that of course means to see life correctly. You're either observing death and the loss of the sensory awareness of this person at the level of reality, which is going to be a very painful experience, especially if that's all you know them to be as. Or you are experiencing, yes, the loss of the sensory awareness of that person, but also the expansiveness into infinite eternal life, where they are now available on all levels, meaning you can see them, you can experience them. They are with you always. They exist in here. They don't exist out here anymore. This out here, we have to learn that this out here is not number one. This isn't the game out here. The game is in here, and then that is the reflection of what we're doing in here. And the more you can bring your attention to consciousness, which is infinite eternal life, you are going to have an easier time in this world of death. So revising death is seeing death clearly, and to see death clearly means to see life clearly, and life is infinite eternal consciousness that exists within you. Its name is I am. You are the infinite I am, and for now you are contained within this beautiful physical instrument that allows you to have that sensory experience, but the sensory experience is not the truth of things. That's just the experience of things, so that you can actually have the experience of touching that person and saying hi to that person and seeing that person. But that person is not limited or bound to just the sensory experience. They are so much more than that. It's all about your focus and what you are choosing to focus on. All you have to do is go back and heal whatever it was that you saw causing that death. And then in your imagination, see them as alive and well, and develop that relationship with them there. Because it is there, whether you're aware of it or not. It's where they are now. So that is, for now, I think, pretty much, let's say. That is, for now, the end of the revision series. And next week, we are going to move on to another topic, and I'm looking forward to that. So have a wonderful week. Stay in I am. Stay in the infinite eternal consciousness that you are, have been, and always will be. I will look forward to seeing you in the next video. Until then, bye for now.